Hey guys, I hope you're well. We are recording today. I'm talking to my friend Patrick Kedemos, who is all the way over in Australia in Perth. I met Patrick last year, no, 2 years ago, I think it was. I pitched Patrick for some investment for one of my companies, and we ended up becoming friends. And when the global pandemic that we have right now hit, we became more friends. Basically, we were sending memes every day, and now you're very much in my life, which I love. And I wanted to kind of bring you on because I value your opinion. This Unfuck Your Life series is all about different perspectives around finance, around life in general, about what we can do to help ourselves. And I think you have, from our conversations for hours on end, I think you have some really key understandings and takeaways that a lot of people that are investing and also that are in business may not yet be aware of, or they are, but they're not quite sure how to navigate. You've got a really good kind of global perspective around economics as well. And I thought that would be quite useful. So I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself and what you do. And then I've got some questions for you.
Absolutely. No, look, it's a pleasure. It's a bit interesting to be talking to you a bit more formally today. Usually I'm talking to the friend. Interestingly, thanks or because of this pandemic, you're a friend that I know both extremely well and that I have never met with. So it's starting to create interesting segmentations in life that we used not to have before. So there's a lot of things, as you know, we talk a lot when you and I speak together about before the pandemic and after the pandemic, our jargon for that being BP and AP. And in reality, the example just gave of someone that I know really well now that you are, and that I, in reality, paradoxically never met with, is a perfect illustration of how much things have shifted so quickly. So I will give more business-related examples, but that are very similar to this one as we explore and investigate this vast world of unfuck your finance, I guess.
In the politest way possible.
Yeah.
So your background, I know you've studied so much and you've taught at many different universities. You just want to give us a little bit of a context around that and your history?
Yeah, sure. So I started really my career doing two polar opposites, in the sense that I was studying advanced mathematics and physics, but at the same time selling marketing research to companies. So I think I've always been a little bit of this kind of semi-geek, if I can say, who was at the same time capable of doing quite complicated, abstract, complex things, and at the same time needing to engage with people, a very extrovert, wanting to make the complex simple and the simple compelling. So yeah, in reality, quite a diverse background at the beginning, mixing hard skills, if I can say, and soft skills. And then progressively, I moved into increasingly senior roles with Fortune 500 companies. So spent 17 years with Air Liquide, which is the world leader for industrial and medical gases. I then ran the energy division of Wesfarmers. Wesfarmers is the General Electric of Australia, so it's the largest Australian company. So after spending quite a bit of time running really large organizations, sophisticated organizations, I moved into the world of being the CEO, the managing director of a large technology company. It was a listed company, so I had to deal with the markets, raise tens of millions of dollars to recapitalize the company. And that made me realize in reality that what I really loved doing was mixing the world of sales, marketing, business development, being the face of the company, if I can say, with the world of finance, and more specifically, the world of capital raising, which in reality is a very transverse activity, simply because you cannot effectively raise capital if you can't sell, if you can't make the complex simple and the simple compelling, if you don't dominate finance enough to be able to harness it and make it simple and exciting, which means that in reality it was a way of rounding and bringing together all those facets that I enjoy. So I've been doing that for about 10 years now. I've done a lot of capital raisings, M&A work for a variety of clients. mostly in the resources sector and the technology sector. I must say that of late, I'm enjoying spending more and more time on technology stories because they're more interesting in general. They're more complicated, they're more diverse. So yeah, that keeps my neurons working more. And over the years, I have moved from my initial way of giving back, which was being the representative of France here in Western Australia. So I used to be the French consul for quite a few years in Western Australia. I then left that role to enter into a new way of giving back, which is basically teaching, coaching, mentoring. So I teach a variety of subjects from financial modeling to strategy, venture capital, private equity. I should probably mute my phone.
Do you know what? I should have said that before, but I thought he's a pro. He won't have that on, but you did.
If you're too perfect, you become unrelatable.
Totally.
So basically that's my way of giving back today, which is teaching, writing, mentoring. I enjoy it very much. I enjoy really spending time with entrepreneurs, helping them really bridge the gap between the idea and the commercial reality, if I can say, of a company. And at the same time, writing, simply because as I've been teaching for quite some time, delivering a number of workshops to boards, executives, etc., what I'm doing, and of course accelerated by the pandemic, having more time, I'm reading a lot more, and I'm structuring a lot more a number of different books that I will be publishing over time. It's more the journey, if I can say, for me, and the research that I enjoy, rather than destination of actually publishing, if that makes sense.
So you have so much vast knowledge around kind of every area that we've discussed over the last kind of year of getting to know each other better. And there's so many things that we've talked about, from politics to economics to kind of currencies to, you know, world wars. And, you know, you've got another Instagram account as well, I know, that's focused on kind of your political side of what you think of what's going on in the planet. You mentioned something to me that I felt, you know, that I've used quite a lot also, you know, at the BP and the AP, so before pandemic, after pandemic, but you also mentioned something that stuck in my mind, which I've used quite a lot, is that when we were discussing around what could happen financially because of the relationship to the global pandemic right now, you said to me that, you know, in 2007 and 08, you know, we had the recession, and in 1929 we had the global depression. But you said what we're going through right now is a complete global dislocation of finance. Can you explain a little bit about what you meant and how that is looking now? Because this was this time last year, I think, almost we were talking about this. It's like March, it's almost a year. So can you explain what that means for you now as well?
Absolutely. I think it's a dislocation in a number of ways, at least probably three major ways. The first way is what I would call the 90% economy. You take a country like France, for example. France is very heavy in services like tourism, like this entire part of the economy that revolves around hospitality, etc. A big segment of their economy is gone. So that's basically what I call the 90% economy. So this dislocation is very real because it translates in actual terms as a, if I can say, increase of inequality, a wedge driven within societies, where the fabric of a society is being challenged by the fact that some people are virtually unaffected or actually even benefiting from the crisis, while at the same time the income of entire segments of the economy has evaporated, from airlines to hotels to hospitality and of course to the culture sector. So I'm taking the example of France because France, in a lot of people's mind, is a little bit the number one tourist destination in the world, but at the same time, usually a bit the epitome of culture, theater, operas, etc., and that has virtually evaporated. The second, of course, area in which this dislocation is taking place is in the fact that the world economy in many ways has segmented geographically. You take a country like Australia, the borders have been completely closed now for a year. Even state borders have been closed within Australia for the majority of the last 12 months. So the reality of a country like Australia is that it is largely cut off in terms of people movements from the rest of the world economy. And at the same time, every state is somewhat becoming an island, if I can say. So that's a geographical fragmentation and dislocation. The third area, which I think is in this context certainly being joined with a more geopolitical, if I can say, evolution of the world, is the dislocation that you have in the supply chain between, generally speaking, a Western world that has discovered that it was highly dependent, overly dependent, ridiculously dependent on Asian supply chains, centered, of course, on China, for a lot of things, from masks to, I'm not going to name each and every product, but basically every industry in the Western world has come to realize that there is too much dependence on supply chains that are distant. But more importantly, and this is where, say, we are rejoining the geopolitical dynamic here, a context where that is happening with an increasingly aggressive superpower that controls a lot of those supply chains. And that, of course, has been also the originator of the virus. So this anti-China, if I can say, sentiment in people's mind, of course, originated with they are sending us the virus. Secondly, they are not sending us a lot of products anymore. And thirdly, what happens next now that they seem much more aggressive? So I think all that, of course, will become a lot more clear as we move into the future. The future, of course, impossible to predict, but we can, I think, safely say that there is going to be an AP and an AP and a BP in terms of how the supply chains are going to fragment, configure, and reconfigure as a result of this pandemic.
So we've discussed so many things in terms of kind of looking at things on a business level. And kind of decisions that you have to make in this market, tough decisions that you have to make. People are making decisions that they wouldn't usually even think of. You have, I think, probably about 11 to 14 businesses, if I remember rightly. I know you speak almost 11 languages and dialects. So that's the number I've got in my head there. I can't remember how many businesses you have, but I know that you have had to make decisions that you're like, oh God, today has been tougher than most. Can you explain from your perspective, you've been in business, you've been in finance, those hard decisions that you've had to make because of the virus? Can you explain kind of some of the hardest ones that you've had to do and just go into a little bit of like, what's that done for you personally? How do you feel around that?
Yeah, so look, for me personally, not much, because I am one of those post-traumatic growth people, if I can say. You have people who collapse after a trauma. I think I've had a very rich and dense life where I've been exposed to all sorts of disruptions, shocks, etc. In reality, I thrive on difficulties. So for me, the post-traumatic growth that I have acquired and the resilience that I have acquired over time almost kicked in immediately at the beginning of the crisis, almost, like a captain who's trained to navigate rough seas and who finally has the mother of all rough seas. So I would like to say that I lived that as a catastrophe. To some extent, I lived that as someone who always prepared for a battle, if I can say, and who went like, great, now I'm having this battle that I am going in a number of ways to enjoy. Of course, my vocabulary can shock a little bit people who have and who continue to live this crisis as a trauma. I recognize that it is a trauma for a lot of people, but it's like everything in life. Some people have to mentally adjust to war and to battles, and some people are more adjusted than others. I think in my case, given the variety of businesses that I had, I was exposed to a perfect storm in that every business was affected at the same time. Some in positive ways and some in negative ways and some in intermediate ways. But Every single of those situations, whether good or bad, meant management attention, meant focus, unusual, crisis level of focus from my side. So I'll give you two extreme examples. As you know well, I'm the owner of a leader for school uniforms in the UK and Ireland. A company like that, of course, was immediately affected by the fact that schools had shut down. So automatically, that means that you have issues in terms of the employment of your staff, of your supply chains. Not gonna enumerate all the problems, but clearly a crisis on your hands. You have, because of that, to adapt to how a certain country is going to respond in terms of restrictions, what's allowed, what's not allowed, schemes that they put in place. For example, the furlough schemes that were put in place in the UK. I had to become an expert at that in an hour. So that's in terms of a business that, what if I can say, negatively impacted. On the other hand, I was lucky to launch a business before COVID. Maybe I was lucky or prescient. Don't know what the word is. I would say lucky, because strategies are always written in reverse. To launch the first dark kitchens in Australia. Dark kitchens, for people listening to us, are basically restaurants with no clients sitting in the restaurant. So they're just kitchens, basically, that depend fundamentally on your Uber Eats, Deliveroos, menu logs, etc., to deliver meals to the home. And as you can imagine, a business like that thrived almost overnight when the pandemic hit. And of course, we had every possible situation in between those two extremes.
Yeah, I remember when you were telling me that business was thriving, it was just like the absolute perfect business that you could have been involved in it during this time. It's crazy. So I've made another kind of note around the subject of hyperinflation. Some people don't even know what inflation is. Can you give us an explanation of what inflation is and what hyperinflation is, and what we can see within the near future based on the finances of this pandemic rolling out within the next few months?
Yeah. Now, I know that you usually find me a bit too pessimistic, so let's try to be a little bit more optimistic here.
Yes.
I don't think we're at huge risk of hyperinflation. I think we will probably see some inflation. We are already seeing enormous inflations in some areas, so I will come back to that in a second to explain it. But I think at the general level of the economy, at the level, if you want, aggregate level of the world economy, I don't think we're likely to see hyperinflation. Seeing inflation at the same time is what we need, and to some extent what decision makers are trying to trigger. As you know, as we're accumulating massive debts and as we're borrowing like there is no tomorrow, usually the easiest way of not having to repay some of the money that you borrowed is to have it eroded, eaten up basically by inflation. So even if central banks, governments are not clamoring too much about the fact that this is in reality what they're trying to engineer, certainly part of their willingness to inject money and at a very rapid clip into the economy is in the hope that inflation will overshoot. Now, hyperinflation, I think, is unlikely. Can I go into that if you wish? It's a little bit more technical, but in reality, inflation is what governments are trying to engineer. We are starting to see small spikes in inflation. Most of it for the time being is coming from the fact that oil prices and food prices have starting to come back to almost pre-pandemic levels. But a lot of the inflation to come is going to come from the fact that governments, and especially the US government with a massive stimulus program, is sending checks directly to consumers. Now, inflation has already occurred in quite dramatic ways in at least three other areas. Area number one is typically your real estate prices. So in many markets from Australia to the US, real estate prices have behaved in ways that people did not see coming. And this is simply the result that people having cash and people wanting defensive assets and at the same time betting on inflation have really piled into real estate markets. So, for example, Australian real estate prices are defying gravity as we speak. It's the same in a number of other markets. The second area where we are seeing inflation is in the stock market, in places like technology companies. SPACs, for example, special purpose acquisition companies, have gone absolutely through the roof. They're raising money like there is no tomorrow. Technology stocks are absolutely going through the roof. So if this is not inflation, I don't know what it is. And the third area, just to name three, I mean, could name a long list from the price of iron ore to a number of other commodities. But the third area that I'm sure a lot of people have noticed are cryptocurrencies. You take Bitcoin. Bitcoin, by definition, is the type of asset that you buy, being limited in number. There would never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. We're about 19 million as we speak. So this is by definition anti-fragile. This is by definition anti-inflation because it's limited. And the reality is that the unit price of an individual Bitcoin has become ridiculously high. It could go a lot higher simply because the more people come into it, the more people anticipate inflation, the more you might actually see hyperinflation in something quite narrow as Bitcoin.
Mm. So for like the general stay-at-home mum or normal father going to get the shopping at the week, this on a Saturday morning, do you think we're likely to see inflation within food prices as well, within like the kind of down-to-earth groceries and goods and stuff?
Most definitely. It's already happening. In most countries around the world, food prices are rising quite rapidly as we speak. They've already risen quite dramatically in some places. Yes, that's definitely something that is happening as we speak. This is also being distorted by the way that supply chains themselves are being disrupted, by the fact that some climatic events have also come on top of that. And as you know, sometimes it's just a perfect storm. When something is already out of balance, as soon as you have a little bit more elements that add to it, then the variance becomes much more significant. Just going to put some lighting on.
Yeah, so you've got beautiful background. It's the lighting from the front that's making it a little bit darker, but it's so bright and sunny over there. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, it's a bit too hot, actually. I don't want to make your UK listeners too jealous.
Yeah, we're going to be a little bit jealous. We're going into spring. Whatever that means in the UK, I don't know. So I wanted to kind of talk lastly before we end it on a kind of a positive note, but we have gone into depth of conversation around things that are happening around the planet that could affect many different parts of the life that we live today. One of the things you mentioned was the dam in China. I remember you talking about, I've forgotten the name of the big dam in China, and the potentiality that could actually break and the catastrophe that would cause. Can you talk a little bit about naming it for a start, because I forgot what it's called, and kind of where we're at in terms of, that story and how would that maybe affect us?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the Three Gorges Dam in China, so it's the biggest dam in the world. As you know, civilizations, and especially the most ancient civilizations like Egypt or China, were structured around rivers, simply because this is where civilization usually thrives in the easiest way. And it's not that I'm predicting that this dam will collapse. I'm just I was just musing in one of our conversations about the fact that if it ever collapsed, and some specialists say that it could because weather patterns changing and floods becoming more severe in that basin, if that dam were to collapse, of course, a lot of the food that China generates would instantly disappear. And that's what some experts claim has been one of the motivations behind aggressive buying of food supplies by the Chinese government. So, predictions of this kind are impossible to make. Nobody could have predicted the tsunami that led to the Fukushima meltdown. I think it's the same here, but it's just to show that in reality we can be prone and we can have a lot of fragilities that can be triggered by a combination of unforeseen catastrophes. And of course, climate change. Climate in general is one of the most fundamental forces that shape the world. And certainly, climate is changing as we speak in a number of parts of our planet.
Mm. And thank you for that. And then lastly, just before we go, I wanted to ask you, in terms of if somebody was listening and they were looking to invest in something at the moment, what's the 2 areas that you would suggest, or that you're personally kind of exposed to? What areas would you suggest for people to look at that would kind of give them the most return or some level of certainty? Nothing can be guaranteed, but just top tips.
Frankly, I would hoard cash as we speak. I think that everything is quite erratic at the moment. Technology stocks have gone through the roof, so it would be a little bit imprudent to buy too many of them. Bitcoin is really high. Real estate prices could maybe be unsettled because we are far from out of the woods with the pandemic yet. A number of shocks could happen. Banks or central banks could become nervous and put restrictions in terms of what banks are allowed to lend for people who are buying real estate. So I think my feeling is that we're far from out of the woods yet. I know you want to finish on a positive note.
You can go where you feel to go, and then I'll bring it up.
But I think the reality is that this story is not over yet. I think markets have recovered very quickly, probably a bit too quickly, given the extent of the dislocation. Real estate prices, as I said, have gone up very quickly. Given what's happening on the front of interest rates, central bank, inflation, I'd be a little bit nervous about bonds. And as you know, once you've named real estate, equity, and bonds, you pretty much named everything other than the side assets, if I can say, that give you a bit of hedging, like gold, maybe Bitcoin. So personally, I would be a little bit prudent. I think people should not get too much ahead of themselves. This story is not over yet.
And do you think if they were a little bit prudent and saved some of their money instead of investing it, do you think that the banks are a safe place to leave their money in at the moment?
Banks are never safe. I think anyone who thinks that banks are safe has not really followed what tends to happen almost systematically throughout history. So, of course, 2008 was interesting in the sense that governments have stepped in to bail out the banks that were too big to fail. The others, of course, have failed. No, look, I think cash is not a dirty word. I think it's important to also understand that things are in a state of flux as we speak. And if someone has not already piled into some asset classes, it might be already too late to try to take too strong a position right now.
Perfect. No, well, thank you. Say that again, sorry?
I could be wrong, but again, I try to not predict too much.
Yeah, no, that's a good place to be. Thank you so much for talking to me today. As I know, we've had so many conversations around finance and kind of what people can do and just the current state of the world, which I always find fascinating talking to you. It's one of my big subjects going into to finance and just looking at how people can kind of work on stuff. Because I think a lot of people have the ostrich syndrome with sticking their head in the sand and their arse in the air, and no one wants their arse in the air. It's not a good position to be in unless you're into it. And it basically just is a time right now to just listen and learn and grow and go a little bit deeper into what we don't yet understand to try and get our head above water. But I wanted to just say thank you so much. I know you've got some books coming out that you're writing. Can you just tell us, I know you're not going to tell me the names and stuff, but just tell us a couple of subjects that you're writing about at the moment.
I can tell you the name of the first one because it's the most important. It's called Earning the Right to Grow, the Art of Capital Raising. So it's bringing together some of my workshops, classes, etc. So it's basically taking the subject from the angle to say raising capital is super hard. You have to earn the right to grow. You have to really harness the skills to be able to succeed and survive the exercise. So it really covers a number of topics from, the founder, entrepreneur, leader, of course, people in general back the jockey more than the horse, if that makes sense. So how to be the right jockey. And then, of course, how to navigate strategy. Strategy usually is not what most people think. So I really develop a framework for strategy based on optionality in reality. And then, of course, building in terms of providing the toolbox, the practical a guide, if I can say, to help people simplify their story, which usually is quite complex, how to make it attractive when they pitch, how to negotiate, how to network to find investors. So it really covers the 360 of what someone really has to master in order to survive the exercise in the best possible conditions. So that's book number 1, I guess. The others are more philosophical. So one is about cultural differences. I have lived in a number of different countries, so I really bring that together with languages, etc. One is really telling the story of France to the non-French. So it's a way to explain the codes and the psyche and the history as well of France. One is about the history of France and the Levant. So France being traditionally the eldest daughter of the Catholic Church, how it protected the Christians of the Levant, and how the relationship was shaped over centuries, including the Crusades and more recent elements. And probably the last one is about the future of mankind. So that's,
which is my favorite one.
A big leap into the future.
Yeah. So people are probably thinking, how many books is he writing? Yes, he's writing a lot, and I just wanted to drop that on the end of it.
Just perhaps to explain, because a lot of people kind of misunderstand what writing actually means. Writing, contrary to what a lot of people think, writing is not writing unless you're in the relatively late and advanced stages of a book, like I am, for example, for Earning the Right to Grow. What I call writing is in reality capturing on paper, documenting my research. So for me, writing in reality is researching, which means a lot of reading. So I don't know if your people can see, but I have a lot of books, for example, on that. The house is absolutely full of books. This is my research tool, really. So I don't necessarily read the book in a linear way. I hunt for things that enabled me to go down a rabbit hole and construct a theory or a framework to explain something in the context of my books. So people go like, how can you write 5 books in parallel? Well, I don't. I research. And when I get tired of a book, I keep reading by taking another book. The important thing is to never stop reading.
Yeah, no, I love that. And see, ending it on a positive note, everybody has time to read at the moment. If you're not reading, or at least audible or listening to podcasts, I don't know, you're probably stuck on Netflix, but that's not a good idea.
That's right. Well, even videos, these days there are so many videos, very informative ones. Sometimes when I'm tired of reading, what I do is I start walking or I go for a run or something, and I just listen to a podcast or a video on one of the subjects that I'm researching.
Yeah, just get some other people's opinions. I love it. Well, look, Patrick, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. This is the second episode in the Unfuck Your Life series. There are plenty more to come, and I'm sure we'll have another conversation about something, and I'll be like, oh, there's time for a video. So
we should write a book one day.
We have said this. We have discussed about writing a book together, and I have got the framework for my book around unfucking your life, and it's very kind of the basic stuff that most people miss. It's where all the awkwardness is. It's where we put our head in the sand, and it's where we just pretend that everything will be okay. And it's this year that we have to really step up and grow. I do actually have workshops for Unfuck Your Life, which all the details will be underneath on the YouTube video, that you can check that out. But it's where'snatat.com/ready to play the game. So you put your details in there. And if you are then we can go forward. But Patrick, you stay there. For everybody else at home that's been watching this, thank you so much. You can reach out to myself or Patrick. The details are in below. And if you've got any questions you want to reach out, then please do so. I will find a way to answer the questions with the guests that I've got coming up. And for everyone else,
Ciao,
enjoy.
guys.
Bye.